Welcome to part 2 of the Rachael Talibart Vision and Light episodes. It's going to be another stimulating half hour plus, and I think we'll just dive straight back into where we left off at the end of the last one. So welcome back, and I hope you've got your answering shoes on.
Yep, I'm ready to go.
Good. Now, on the Vision and Light episodes, there have been quite a large number of male guests and quite few female guests. I think Julia Anna Gospodarou, the Greek architecture photographer, who's amazing, Jennifer Renwick, Sarah Marino have been on, and I'm struggling to think of another. So I think you're only the 4th woman I've had on the show, which is a crying disgrace, and I need to rectify that. Now, it's been talked about a lot about different styles of photography being male photography, and small scenes and intimate scenes and macro and flowers being the realm of female photographers. Your work seems to span a huge emotional spectrum, from very raging, aggressive and contrasty through to very soft and ethereal. Do you think that landscape photography in any shape or form has a gender associated with its aesthetic?
I don't at all. So I shall be quite frank. I honestly do not believe that women and men, because of their gender, create differently. I do believe that women and men are raised differently, and society conditions them differently. And if there are more women doing flowers and babies and things, maybe it's because they've been conditioned to think of those as the right subjects for women. Likewise, more men doing mountains, perhaps for the same reason. But I've got plenty of male clients who produce the most sensitive pictures of flowers and details. And I also have female clients who do very rugged, aggressive type photos. So I honestly think that it's a construct, another construct, gender and creativity here. I'm actually, I'll tell you a little story. Another podcast person, I won't say who, but I owe him an apology, approached me last year during the summer lockdown, I think. Would I please consider joining a panel for a podcast about women in landscape photography? And I'm afraid he caught me after I'd had 2 similar requests from 2 other people. And I must apologize to him, because I think he got a sort of tirade from me in an email. I'm sure I would have been much nicer face to face. A tirade, because I am not a woman photographer, I'm a photographer. And I think it was annoying to me that all the requests that I'd had recently at that point to go on podcasts had been to talk about my sex, my gender. And I like to think that I can contribute to a dialogue about photography without it being about my gender. So the poor man, I mean, he had definitely had women on his podcast before, yes, talking not about being women. So he was a perfectly blameless, nice chap, but he got it with 2 barrels.
I think we're talking about a mutual friend of ours, actually, someone I know.
Oh, you know, do you? Okay.
But and this is I agree with you 100%. And I think it's another one of these, I'm very against judgment as some form of marking system. And I think if when you submit photographs to competitions, for example, we don't know the gender of the person whose photograph we're looking at. Equally, we don't know their faith, we don't know their age, we don't know anything about them, we don't know what country they're from. And all of those things they're immaterial to the aesthetic of the photograph, unless perhaps the photographer wants to make something of it as part of their narrative, I suppose. But no, I agree with you 100%. And I just hate this judgment that gets put, oh, you know, she is a great photographer, rather than they are a great photographer. You know, so I'm 100% with you on this one, and you're definitely not here as a female photographer. You're here because you're a great photographer.
Thank you. And honestly, I wouldn't be here if I had thought that I was here as a female photographer.
No.
But I knew that was the case.
I'm getting really good at wording those texts. Now, you have a new book out, which I have a copy of right here. It's a big step up from Sirens as a product. It's a significantly more bookish book, if that makes sense. As someone who's embarking on his book now, it seems to me to be at the same time incredibly satisfying and terribly scary in equal measure. Is that your experience? I mean, it's such a wonderful product, but we only see the finished product. We don't see the angst.
It's hard. I know I've never self-published, not yet. I'm not saying I won't. I think it's a perfectly good avenue to go down, and you certainly make a lot more money if you self-publish. But that's not been my experience so far. I've only worked with publishers, and inevitably that involves compromise. You can't collaborate without compromise, and that can sometimes be painful. And also there are plenty of stresses involved. You know, nothing ever goes smoothly. You know, there might be a broken down printer, or pictures might turn out not quite how you wanted. I mean, one of the things is, if you do a litho print book, which this one is, and so have my previous ones been, you don't really get proofs of the actual prints as they're going to look. You get digital proofs,
yeah,
but actually the prints don't really look like those.
No.
When they're on the and it's too expensive to run a full set of proofs on the litho printer. You might as well just print the book and be done with it.
Yes.
And because for various reasons, I've never been allowed or able to go on press. Because, for example, this last time, COVID, there was a lockdown, and the publisher didn't feel, you know, he had a duty to his staff, so didn't want me coming into the premises. So, you know, there's always, you're going to have to accept that some things aren't going to look exactly how you wanted them to look. Having said that, it's also, you know, on the upside, it's lovely to have a book. I mean, you know, I love books. I've talked about that a lot. I love photo books, and it's quite an emotional moment when you open, you know, when I first got a copy of the book, it was a lovely feeling. And so it's totally worth doing, absolutely. But you're already down the process a bit, so you'll know this. But if anyone out there's thinking about it, I think as long as you're aware that it's going to be at least twice as difficult, probably more than you imagine, and you're prepared for that, then I think it's a really good thing to do.
So for people that don't want to go to the expense, of course, of making a book, because it's certainly not a cheap thing to do, bringing together photographs as a body of work is clearly has fulfillment in its own. Now, the thing that fascinates me with your ocean photography is the landscape has no inherent metaphor in it. Really, a tree's a tree, a rock a rock's, a wave's a wave, from an objective point of view. However, these aren't just waves to you. These aren't just shells on a beach to you. There's something more going on there. Now, obviously, most of the photographs in a portfolio are standing up on their own as expressive, articulate statements. How much of the metaphor that you feel gets wrapped up in the title? Of course, I think there's a significant, that's the fish hook, I suppose, of the metaphor. Do you find that you use other devices in your processing, for example, that allow nuances of that metaphor to be implied? And how successful do you think you are with that exercise?
It varies, like everybody. Some are better, more successful than others. But yeah, so slightly approaching that chain of questions back in the opposite direction again. The penultimate thing you asked was about processing to evoke the metaphor, and sirens is a good example of that.
Yes.
The original pictures for sirens, the ones from Storm Imogen, which is more than 5 years ago now, and they're probably still the most well-known ones from the portfolio. I had this idea, as you know, that these waves seem to have personality, and because of my studies and various things, instinctively felt that I wanted to connect them with myths of the ocean. I think this idea that they would be placeless and timeless brought me to myth. So I don't know if you've noticed necessarily, but most of those first ones are quite, they're sort of, they're not many of them are black and white. They're almost all colour, but they're very muted colour. They're soft greys, really. So I had in my mind the statues, because how do we, we've seen the figures from Greek myth mostly as statues.
Right.
And they're usually grey. And so I just thought I wanted to, in every respect that I possibly could, carry the concept through. So the processing, I desaturated the pictures to let them be that sort of grey that, in my mind, connected it again to the theme.
That's smart.
Well, smart. Now I'm explaining it to you after the event. At the time, I think a large part of it was just experimenting.
Right.
And then thinking, oh, that works. Why does it work? Rather than sitting in some sort of room and thinking, oh, I should make them grey so they look like statues. It doesn't always work in that order.
Right.
But definitely that was the idea going on.
They're fascinating photographs. We as my wife and I have the original book also. So it's very different from this one in terms of the way the images are presented. These feel, I mean, it's a physically bigger book, so I think the scale of everything just feels more engaging. But the serendipity of some of these moments in time is just insane. I mean, Loki, for example, is just insane. I mean, it's possibly my favorite ocean photograph of all time. So we'll put it up on the screen just now. It's an absolutely incredible and terrifying photograph. I mean, it truly is something out of a horror movie in a way, because it's so expressive and so, but we've talked about constructs quite a few times in this discussion so far, and this imagery is just another construct. It's just another part of human nature, trying to find pattern in chaos.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well,
worked out all right for you, eh?
Yeah, I know. So I've always seen faces and things, and in fact, most people do.
Yeah.
And probably all children do. It's called pareidolia, as you probably know, from the Greek, I think. And it's cool. It's just another way of our imaginations interpreting the world. I know you've been to Iceland, and I have many times. And when I first went up to the north, that Lake Mývatn, and well, I'm pronouncing that badly, and Akureyri up there, I was very struck by all the faces in the rocks. It seemed entirely natural to me that the Icelandics should have all these wonderful stories of the hidden people. Because why wouldn't you with a landscape like that? I love that sort of enriched experience of the world because of our imaginative response to it.
I'm just frothing. I'm chomping at the bit.
Get back to Iceland.
Well, I was there last summer. I was there with Tom Heaton and Adam Gibbs. We were up there for about 10 or 11 days, and we weren't in that part of Iceland. We were just in the interior. But you're dead right. As the snow melts and the gullies fill up with snow or keep the snow, and it's that pattern recognition thing going on again. What's next for Rachael because obviously, you know, this is what worries me a bit about my Gobi book, is it can become career defining in a way. And that's probably my biggest fear, is that, you know, you turn into, and no offense to music fans, but you know, you get to that sort of Rolling Stones mentality where you're playing the same chords and it kind of sounds a bit the same as it's always sounded. Now, obviously, without going back to the desert, I'm not going to be making any more desert images, but obviously your fascination with the ocean, you talked in part one about being on this trajectory of your own creative development and so forth. Do you have a new D forming in the distance that you're working towards, or is it less focused than that?
It's less focused than that, thank goodness, because I think I'd be even more frustrated by lockdown if
Mm.
I had. I've got a couple of projects that are ideas that have come to me that I'm itching to do.
Are you training house sparrows?
Oh, can you hear them? Yeah, just outside my window. Sorry, the window is shut, but I can't do anything about it. Anyway, it's lovely sound, isn't it?
It is.
Yes. So I have a couple of ideas that I'm really keen to get on with,
Right.
and I can't actually. So at the moment, so yes, I'm looking forward to getting my teeth into those ideas. Whether they'll turn out to be publishable, I have no idea. But one of the things that I've absolutely learned is not to put that pressure on myself. So I've said this to other people, and some people have found it really useful. So I'll say it to you too, in case your listeners do. Is I genuinely do look on every single thing I do as a step towards the next thing rather than as the end goal.
Right.
As soon as you take away the pressure on the thing you're doing to produce a portfolio picture, for example, I think you relax. And for me anyway, that is almost a prerequisite. I can't create if I'm worried about producing the next portfolio image. So for me, a lot of my ideas come when I'm doing crazy things that might not, you know, with the camera, that might not actually lead to a portfolio picture at all. But while I'm doing that silly thing, I'll have an idea, well, if I do it this way instead, maybe that would be interesting. And then when I'm doing it that way, I might think, well, I'll tweak this. And the end product, if I'm lucky enough to get to a new portfolio, might be completely unrecognizable from the thing that I was doing at the start of that. But that was still a necessary step. You know, it was my B maybe in my journey to D, or Z, or wherever it is I'm going. It might take many, many steps. And as soon as you allow yourself the luxury of being able to do stuff that won't be productive, that stuff becomes more productive, ironically. And I don't know any other way to work now. So I'll just go out there, enjoy myself, standing in my knees in the sea, doing weird things, and hopefully not getting told off by people, and hooted at by people, as you said. And just see what happens. And I don't think I know how to work any other way now. Just see what happens.
I think it's very easy to look on these sort of discussions as just random. And I think now that this new social media thing has come out, what's it called?
Clubhouse.
Clubhouse. I can never remember the name of the thing. Boardroom is the one that comes into my mind all the time. I don't know why. So this is Clubhouse. Yeah. You know, there's a danger that it's just two people or a group of people just talking. And it's a bit like that with this, even though we're on camera, which is there's little nuggets of education in these discussions that are gold dust. And I think one of the things that's clear when I speak to you is that all of us who are established, I suppose, as photographers, you know, we have careers as photographers, and there's an impression that everything you do is somehow fully formed and mature.
Mm.
And it's the same with the guitar side of things. Guy Tal and I had a conversation a few years ago, and he quoted somebody else, which was, if you go into the camera store and buy a camera, you call yourself a photographer. If you go into a music store and buy a flute, you own a flute.
Mm.
which is a very different thing. You know, you don't become a flautist by buying a flute, and you don't become a photographer by buying a camera. There is this timeline that you talk about. And I think it's reassuring, I think, for listeners who might be on a different stage of their development, you know, earlier in the development and feeling less self-assured about themselves, that we're absolutely making it up as we go along most of the time. And this is why I think I was sort of commenting in part one about some of the feel of some of your photography. It has a giddy frivolity to it that is just so effervescent and joyful. You know, it's a celebration of your relationship with the element that you find. And this is where my next question is coming from. There is a question coming up. There should be a warning question coming.
Good, don't worry.
There is a question coming, which is your how much of you is in your photography? Do you feel that your photography in some way is a pictorial aesthetic representation of some inner version of you, an introverted you or an extroverted you or a joyful you or a sad you? Do you use photography to self-cleanse, as it were? If that doesn't sound horrible.
No, it's all right. I'm going to assume it doesn't. Yeah, absolutely. I'm expressing through my photography, simply not because I'm not deliberately, but because I can hardly help doing otherwise.
Right.
I'm expressing how I feel about my subject, and mostly it's joyful. So even Loki, you know, who you mentioned, who, by the way, is, as you've probably now realised, he's one of only 2 photographs from Sirens, the book, that I've allowed to be reproduced again in
Right.
Tempest. So it shows you how much I like him.
Me
you know,
too.
it depends on your perspective with Loki and how you're feeling in any given minute. So, you know, at the moment when we all feel a bit trapped, maybe he's slightly sinister, maybe he's leering at us, but on another day he's laughing with us.
Right.
So I think photography can be interpreted, but still I have a very joyful approach to the coast. You mentioned introverts and extroverts. In reality, of course, we all know that the Myers-Briggs test, etc., has been debunked as any sort of reliable reflection of the multitudinous possibilities of the human psyche. And I actually, and it's become fashionable, hasn't it, to say you're an introvert. But have you ever noticed that most self-proclaimed introverts put more selfies on Instagram than any of the rest of us? Anyway, put that aside for the moment. That's probably controversial. I'm not an extrovert. I'm not an introvert. I'm like almost everyone. I'm somewhere in the middle.
Right.
A balance of the two. And the sea nurtures both sides of me. You know, I have quiet alone time when I'm with the sea, but it's also a way of looking out into the world, not looking into myself.
Right.
And I think those two possibly contrary attitudes can coexist in the same moment, in the same person. And that's what I think they do when I'm making pictures.
Oh, this is one of these conversations. The thing I enjoy most about this is I feel like it just talk forever, you know, and that is such a joyful thing for me, because your passion is so infectious for what you do and how you express yourself. So I'm just going to keep plowing on with another question, if you don't mind. I'm very interested between the relationship between cognitive planning, preparation, and what Ansel, what has been attributed to pre-visualization, as it were, versus intuition and the innate. And I think from a creative point of view, I believe that intuition and spontaneity and curiosity and frivolity and imagination are our biggest allies in true creativity, because I believe that the more cognitive we are about it, the more we become trapped within societal conventions of what is acceptable and what is normal. How much of your relationship with the sea is intuitive versus cognitive?
Yeah, I like you share an interest in the intuitive, the natural, the unconstrained reaction and engagement with your subject. I think is so important for creativity. However, I do also pre-visualize. I think we can have both and keep them in balance, and they can coexist. Lots of things are coexisting in this conversation.
Yeah, you're a wonderfully accepting woman.
Why not have all the tools at your disposal? And usually I think both are working together. So we've talked about sirens a lot just because I suppose it's a finished portfolio, and so I've seen it through its whole sort of evolution, if you like, in that it came from experimenting, not being satisfied with making the pictures that everyone else is making, trying to make different pictures, and then reviewing them at home critically, and then having an idea, and then developing that idea in my head, and then going out looking to make the photos that fitted that idea. So that, you could say I pre-visualized sirens because I had the idea before Storm Imogen happened.
Right.
I photographed the sirens, you know, like Loki and all of those. But on the other hand, I only got that pre-visualized idea because of standing on the beach at that location in stormy weather, seeing what I could do and making a lot of really bad photos in the process. So I think they work in harmony, and actually it can be really difficult to know where the boundaries of them lie. But yes, I think definitely, I mean, the crux of what you're saying is the value of play, of experiment and curiosity.
Right.
Be curious, I think it's inherent in us all, and it is a tremendously powerful capacity. And yes, going out and just see what happens, but always looking, always curious about what might happen if I do this, or what is that over there? Let's have another look. You know, something that everyone else has walked past, but it looks interesting.
And this is something that I think is, and another thing that doesn't get talked about an awful lot is because we talk about, I've mentioned judgments on a few occasions, and I think there's a very significant difference between judgment and judgmental. And one of the things I think many photographers struggle with is there is an ability to objectively look at their own work and not be judgmental, but judge in a way that allows us to evaluate. Because this is something you just talked about there, was looking at images when you get home and evaluating and deciding, okay, not satisfied with that, satisfied with that. Now, there's going to be a crossover, I guess, between the aesthetic first impression, I suppose, which is obviously a strong point in any don't like judgment. Obviously, there's going to be some technical issues with movement. I would imagine that over the years, you've developed a kind of a superpower with time, you know, your ability to recognize the aesthetics of time and feel the difference that different shutter speeds make on the aesthetics. Have you, now I'm not going to ask you the question, which is what's your favorite shutter speed, because I know how absurd that is, but I would imagine that the type of photographs that went into Sirens and a lot of the Tides and Tempests book, time is a massive factor. You know, it's probably the most significant factor, I guess, is the time evaluation. How, you know, tell me about your relationship with time and the aesthetics of time and what it means to you and what the images are expressing through your use of time. I mentioned this because there was a photograph I liked of yours on Insta today, and it was taken on a beach that you and I both love on the northwest of Scotland there. And it was the mountains of the other island with a rolling wave, and just the layers of time and motion in that were just jaw-dropping. Serendipity or planning?
It's a combination. Again, we're having them both. Why not? That's the theme of today. So time is so important. I'm generalizing massively because you have to talk about anything really. You could say that while aperture is king for landscape photographers, shutter speed is king or queen for ocean photographers, because the sea is always moving. So shutter speed starts to have a really, really significant impact on your picture. So if I'm not working in manual, it's probably going to be shutter priority, not aperture priority. So I just think that, you know, the speed is everything. So time in that sort of very basics at the very early stage of making the photo is really important. Time also for me, and this was at the beginning of your question actually, you talked about coming back, reviewing your work, getting some objectivity, knowing which pictures you want to take further and which you don't. And for me, time is really important there. And the more I do this, the longer I do this, the bigger gaps I'm leaving between making the photos and the next step. And that for me really helps me have the objectivity. So no, I won't say I never do this because sometimes there are other reasons, but I very rarely come home, upload the pictures, edit them the next day, publish to Instagram that night.
No.
That's almost never. And in fact, it's more likely to be weeks, if not months, from me coming home at the end of a shoot to me actually even uploading the pictures. That, again, I think that really helps. It gives you objectivity. It gets you out of the sort of adrenaline rush, the endorphins that you've experienced from the moment of making the picture, have had time to settle down, and you're more objective. And then also not deleting. Really important. I mean, unless it's a complete disaster, you know, nothing's in focus or something, unless you meant it to be that way, ICM. But otherwise, apart from those pictures, I won't delete. So Loki, for example, I didn't even see Loki for 6 months after Storm Imogen.
Wow.
So I took 3,000 photos that day. It took me a long time to get through them. So thank goodness I hadn't been a tidy photographer and, you know, deleted all but the best. So time is involved there. And then to go even more deeply, which I think is where you were heading, time is interesting to me on the sort of big level now as well. So yeah, obviously choosing to study at university the literature of the past, the Iliad, the Odyssey, you know, for sirens, that's from a long time ago. I'm interested in big time, and I like the idea of being able to evoke a sense of big time in my work. I've got a portfolio on my website called After Earth. I'm actually, I don't know that the pictures will do that for anyone else, but for me, it is me imagining what the Earth might be like when we're long gone. You know, a long time in the future when humanity is no longer here making its mark on the Earth. So yeah, time is really interesting.
It is.
Timey-wimey stuff, as Dr. Who would call it.
Well, I did astronomy and astrophysics at university.
Oh, okay.
So time was a big thing for me too.
Yes.
So I think understanding time and being able to manipulate and manage time, I consider to be photographers' strongest superpower. You know, that would be my, you know, cape. It would be a big T on the front of my t-shirt. You know, yeah, you know, the time, because it's so. It's a metaphor in its own right, I think. And the thing that also strikes me is, you know, I had a talk with Bill Neal about this, and I was speaking to Joe Cornish about this also, is that we're on a timeline, and that as contemporary landscape photographers, you know, both of us working now, it's going to be interesting 20 years, 50 years, 100 years in the future to see what landscape photography's purpose is. So I think people are going to be looking back on our time almost either lovingly into the past or, you know, mockingly, or whatever it may be. So I think this is where, again, your work, it so strongly evokes you and your personality. And I think this is something you're just ridiculously successful at, is that. So I just want to thank you for your work, more than
Oh,
anything.
that's very, very nice of you to say that. And I would just add one thing to that, one caveat, if you like. You mentioned Joe Cornish, you didn't interviewed him recently. I could listen to Joe talk about landscape photography all year. He just is, he's great, the way he talks
Yes.
about it and his attitude to it. And I think he's more than once, that I've heard anyway, commented about the sort of hubris, if you like, of photographers making their work all about them when they're photographing the natural world.
Mm.
And I don't want to do that, not just because Joe said I shouldn't, respect him, but because at the end of it all, I have just the biggest love of and respect for the things that I photograph. So I don't want to mess with that. I want to respect that and respectfully show that. But I do want to show the things that I've seen, back to where we were at the start of the
Right.
first half of this, rather than it to suggest that it is going to be an objective record is actually pointless. There's no way it can be.
Right.
We're always going to create work that is in some way mediated by how our eye and our brain see it. So I think it is an alliance of the two, really. I'm not going to, go down to the beach and construct a scene. Nature offers me what it offers me, but I am going to try and show it to you in a way that expresses the way I see it, because I hardly know any other way to do it, frankly.
Right. And well, that's another huge point, is that the judgment coming. I personally believe if we're doing it right, that we have an awareness of our impact on the environment and nature and the places that we visit. And this is, again, is something that I always feel humbled, and you mentioned Joe. I mean, his episode was just incredible. Again, it's just someone who's so wise. But the thing that's a common theme with so many of the people who I get to speak to is a very strong sense of responsibility and awareness of the impact that we can have, both as a positive and a negative. And again, I just think your work is you're just another person whose work has an integrity and a wholesomeness to it that comes along with a bunch of environmental messages and conservation messages. So again, yes, another big thank you for that. I think we're going to have to wrap up. We're heading off towards dinner time here. It's getting dark, and you're.
Notice suddenly the light from my monitor is all.
But well, I could just talk about this for hours and hours and hours, and I hope we get to meet one day when we can have more of these conversations. And
Yeah, I hope so too. It's been a pleasure, Alister. Thank you very much for inviting me.
it's all well. You've said nice things about me too, but I will say it's been all mine. It has been a real pleasure to have you on. I've been looking forward to this one for so long, and it's taken too long to get you on here. But thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure all the images we're going to be showing, we'll do a slideshow at the end of the episodes here with some of the work that we've shown through the slideshow as well. But thank you again. Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Bye.